Welcome. This yin yoga practice will begin with Reclined Butterfly Pose, and then Dragonfly Pose, both sides of Sleeping Swan Pose, Happy Baby Pose, a supported bridge pose that I call Milky Way Pose, and then finally for the ending resting posture, an option to do legs up the wall pose. So if you are wanting to practice legs up the wall, then have some wall space available for that pose. Also, some books, yoga blocks, bolsters, something to generate height under the supported bridge pose that I call Milky Way Pose. And you also have an option for a heart opener when you're in your reclined butterfly pose at the beginning of practice. So a blanket roll might be handy for that. And as usual, soft props like blankets and pillows as needed. The title of this class, it refers to a concept known as the flaw of averages, which I describe as the fallacy of normal. The practice starts in reclined butterfly pose. So make your way onto your back. And this is the first yin posture, so we'll be here for a while. So the idea is, since this is the beginning of practice, and since we'll be here for a while, allow yourself to make yourself comfortable here. So for reclined butterfly, you make your way onto your back, bend your knees, put your feet on the floor, bring the bottoms of your feet together, and lower your knees out to the sides. Now, your heels don't have to be that close into your hips. They can be fairly far from your hips. And if this creates instability in one or both knees, then feel free to grab props. Maybe it's a block, maybe it's a bolster, maybe it's a blanket to place underneath the legs so that they feel a little bit more grounded. Otherwise, if you're feeling fine, if your knees reach the ground or if you feel fine with them floating, they can just float here. Now you can stay here or you can add a heart opener by placing a blanket roll underneath your upper body here. So in order to make a blanket roll, take a blanket, make kind of this shape with the blanket and then roll it up like a burrito until you have, and maybe take some time to make a nice roll. The nicer and more uniform the roll is, the more comfortable it's going to be underneath your back here. Place it crossways on your mat here. And then if you want this extra, and by the way, you can adjust the height of the burrito, basically. If this is too big and uncomfortable, then unroll your blanket until it's small enough to where it's something that feels a little bit more comfortable. And then lay back and come back into your reclined butterfly pose. Here. So this is kind of an option here, just to create some reverse pressure on the upper torso. So I'm laying on it with my upper back on it. So the blanket rolls like right underneath my armpits. It's not under my neck. It's not under my lumbar here. And then if your head and your neck leaning back like this is too uncomfortable, then take a pillow or another blanket, or maybe even a block or a bolster, place it under your head as a cushion to keep your neck in more of a neutral position. I get a little bit of a yin feel in my neck here by letting it lean back like this, so I'm fine here. And then again, maybe you like the heart opener, but you don't like the reclined butterfly legs, so you can keep your legs straight. Or you can multitask here by coming back into butterfly legs. And we'll spend a couple more minutes here just to begin practice here. So the breathing exercise to just get a sense of inner grounding is an interesting one. I just want you to concentrate on your normal natural breath. In other words, no arbitrary breathing technique. Try to release your control over your breath and just notice what your breath wants to do. in this posture naturally. And maybe be accepting of that. Create a sense of radical acceptance for whatever your breath is doing. This is actually challenging because what we really want to do is to be able to just notice our unconscious breath, the breath, how we're breathing when we're not paying attention to the breath. I always like to tell people it's an advanced yoga practice to just notice your natural breath, because the minute you take conscious control of your breath, you change it. And so the challenge here is see if you can come back to what your breath wants to be without you changing your breath. And what you'll realize is it's actually hard to do. Can you have radical acceptance for this present moment, for your present breath, for your present body here? In other words, no arbitrary, no contrived breathing, even though those are very healthy exercises and do actually help to stress and exercise the cardiovascular system. Sometimes, though, we need to just check in and notice what our natural breath is up to. So notice yours right now. And notice that you're lying here, you're watching a yoga video, your breathing is probably normal. At least it's keeping you alive here, no matter if you have other comments or ideas about your breathing. It is part of you. It is part of your special uniqueness. And we're all unique, which is a hard, also an almost impossible concept to understand, which I'll get into a little bit more later in the practice. The idea here is to just bring your mind back. Notice the character of your inhales, the character of your exhales, the length and duration of each, the sensation of each, maybe the texture of each breath. And you're noticing your real manifestation at this moment of time, which is the only thing that's real. It's the only thing that exists in reality. Everything else is a concept. The future is a concept. The past is no longer reachable. The past no longer exists too. It's actually not real. It lives in our brains as a memory pattern, so we can remember things about the past. The past is not real. The future is not real. And a concept like normal and average is also not real. It's a theoretical construct. So just a couple more breaths here. If you're in Reclined Butterfly Pose, maybe bring the knees up first, and you can use your hands to help the knees back up to center. And then very slowly roll to one side. Maybe keep your head and neck close to the floor just to not overstrain your neck here. When you get over to your side, then invite yourself up to a seated position. And if you were using the blanket roll to get the extra heart opener, we're done with the blanket roll, so you can place it off to the side. Come to a comfortable seat. Come to a seat. A few gentle yang exercises before we move into the next yin posture. A few shoulder exercises. So you can sit cross-legged or some other comfortable seat. Just have a little bit of room around your torso here. We'll do a little bit of shoulder rolling here. So bring your spine nice and neutral, and for a moment, tone through your core to just feel your spine lengthening. Maybe maybe your sternum presses forward slightly and your ears move back over your shoulders just to find that neutral spine of yours. And then we'll start some shoulder rolling. So hands and arms are fairly relaxed, and then just roll your shoulders forward and towards each other, and then up towards the ceiling, and then back, and then down. Just do this slowly and find your range of motion here with these shoulder rolls. Kind of feel, and they don't have to be big. They have to be yours. They have to be your shoulder rolls. So maybe about 4 cycles of these in the same direction. So we're moving gentle circles in one direction. And then when you get done with those 4, we'll make eagle arms here. So extend your arms out to either side, lengthen out through your arms, and then cross your arms with the right arm underneath the left here. So I'm not shadowing you here, or mirroring you. Try to cross above the elbows, bend the elbows, and then see where your forearms end up. Maybe they just kind of end up here. Or maybe your hands can reach the shoulders. Or maybe you can keep wrapping the forearms until you can maybe catch the fingers. Or maybe you can completely wrap your hands into a prayer position like this. It doesn't have to look like this. It can be here. You're just going to find till you can't go anymore here. Then move your elbows forward and up slightly until you're feeling some pressure somewhere. A lot of us feel this in the back of the torso, feeling this in the shoulder blades. You might feel it somewhere else. So notice where you feel this. Maybe take one more breath. And then release, maybe shake it out, and then shoulder rolls in the other direction. So if you can't remember what direction you did the shoulder rolls in, then just fake it. Just do another set of 4 shoulder rolls. It doesn't really matter what the direction is here. Go in the opposite direction if you can remember what the opposite direction was. So about 4 slow shoulder rolls here in the opposite direction here. And then extend your arms out to either side. So eagle arms on the other side now here. So it's the left arm underneath the right, or opposite arms here. Same exercise. So try to get the elbows above each other crossed here. Bend at the elbows, and then see where your arms end up. Maybe hands can find upper arms. Maybe they can find shoulders. Maybe they can find fingers. Maybe they can make the eagle prayer hands here. And if you want added oomph, move your elbows forward and up here. And then when you get there, maybe stay there for a breath or so. And then go ahead and release and shake it out. And then bring yourself on hands and knees. We'll do a few cat and cows here. So from hands and knees, let's start with cat pose. So stable hands, stable knees, nice stable neutral table pose, and then begin to flex and round your spine up towards the ceiling. Tuck your tailbone, tuck your head in your chin, and feel this forward bend in cow, or in cat pose here. And then slowly sink into cow pose. So belly sinks towards the floor, tailbone tries to point up here, and sternum moves forward here in cow pose. And then go ahead and cycle, maybe 3 more cycles here. So move back into cat pose, and then into cow, and then a couple more cycles. Try to go at your own pace. Maybe you want to move faster, so try that. Maybe you want to move slower, so try that. And find the pace that works for you. Maybe your breath wants to move in a certain way here too. Let it move the way it wants to move rather than what you want it to move. This is getting in touch with your own personal self here. And then at some point come back to neutral here. And then we'll get set up for the next long held yin posture, which will be Dragonfly pose, which is a seated wide-legged forward fold. Now if you have a lot of stiffness in the backs of your legs or your back of your torso like I do, it is useful to sit up on some height, like a bolster or maybe a couple of blankets. I'm going to use a block here. And then sit with your legs out in front And then bring your legs out wide, extended out wide as far as they go until they stop for you. In other words, don't worry about what it looks like. Just move by feel. Move until you reach a stopping point. Legs are extended, but they don't have to be straight. So they can be bent, and they can be really bent if they need to be bent. And you can put padding underneath your knees if you need to have padding there. This might not work for some people at all. And so if that's the case, one modification is to come back into butterfly legs. Instead of folding back, we'll eventually fold forward. So instead of reclined butterfly, we'll just do normal yin butterfly here. But if dragonfly, if this wide-legged works for you, then go ahead and move into this wide-legged stance. You have the option to just stay with a nice neutral torso, or if you want to, begin to fold forward, and as you do so, relax the muscles in your torso, let your spine round. Again, maybe I want to use the word naturally round here. So naturally round here until it stops here. And you might need to invoke extra props to create a base to support your torso or your head here if you need to. And that's perfectly fine if this is feeling too desperate here. Some of us were okay with hanging out here. Some of you will be so flexible, you'll be doing almost the splits with your torso lying right down onto the ground. If you're not feeling anything, then maybe you need to dig a hole into the floor so that your torso can keep going until you finally find a stopping point. I'm just kidding about that. Probably not a good idea to dig holes in the floor here. But we are trying to find a real stopping point. That's one of the parts of yoga. For a lot of us, it's really easy to find that stopping point. We find it right away here. So this is where we'll stay for a few more minutes. I'll run through the principles of yin here. So there's 3 principles of yin. The first principle is called find your edge. Those 3 words are all important. First of all, you need to find it, and you need to find it by physical sensation. So you're trying to find your stopping points. The second principle, the second part of finding your edge is your edge. You're not trying to find my edge. You're not trying to find some universal edge. You're trying to find your personal edge for your unique body and unique being here. So when you stop, you start to feel that resistance. That's where you stay here. So, and you might have to modify. Maybe this shape doesn't work at all for you. So maybe try butterfly, or maybe try with knees bent more with props underneath them, or maybe try with just a straight torso here. Otherwise, we'll stay here for about another minute and a half, if that's okay. Once you have found something where you're feeling stopping points, you're feeling maybe a little bit of sensation, maybe you would even characterize it as discomfort, but if it's desperate pain, then that's too deep. You back off until you're just feeling something that's not desperate or not painful here. And then you decide to stay for a while. So this is where it starts to get yin. We're trying to relax the muscles and let the stress kind of marinate in the deeper tissues, the connective tissue system. This requires traction and time. Soft muscles, traction, and time. So we need to stay still, and that means we're not jumping in and out of the posture here. So I'm kind of bobbing up and down to talk, but my legs are not really doing much, right? They're just kind of marinating, my legs and my hips here. This requires a little bit of patience. This requires a little bit of fortitude to stay here. And then finally, we stay for extended periods of time, several minutes rather than several breaths here. So just a few more breaths here. Time is another factor of the edge. So you either stay for less time or more time too, but in a structured class like this, I'm setting times of around 3 to 4 minutes per posture. And so that's maybe okay for most people. For some it's too long, and for some they'd like to stay longer, and give yourself permission to stay longer. This is a very accepting and allowing practice here. But we stayed for a significant amount of time here. So go ahead and bring yourself up. And then just notice if how the reverberation feels. You can slowly bring yourself legs out. You can use one leg at a time to bring your legs back together. You can extend your legs out. You can point and flex your feet. Here for a counter pose exercise, I'm going to propose a lateral bend here. So come to comfortable seat again. It can be cross-legged or something else here. Go up tall through your torso, raise your arms up overhead and lengthen out through your arms, and then laterally bend over to the left. So you can put the left hand down on the ground, reach up and over with the right arm, and feel kind of the lengthening and the tension along this right side here. And just kind of move over. This is a little bit of a yang mover, so you're kind of engaging muscles to make the posture, but you're nice and stable because you got the left hand planted in the ground here. And then when you're ready, bring yourself back up. Both arms come up or coming to the other side. So right hand comes down to the ground to brace yourself and create stability. And then you can bend over to the right and reach up and over and lengthen out with the left arm to feel that opening. The left shoulder down through the left side ribs, maybe all the way down into the left hip here. Even though we're not tipping over, we're actually bending, so we're trying to keep that left hip down here. One more breath here, and then bring everything all the way back up. We'll move into our next yin posture, which is the first side of Sleeping Swan Pose. So Sleeping Swan is the yin name for pose that's often called pigeon pose, only we'll do it in a yin fashion with muscles soft if that's possible here. So come to hands and knees, and there'll be an alternative if Sleeping Swan doesn't work for you. Bring that right foot up between your hands and inch the left knee back here into this low lunge, and then start inching that right foot over to the left side of your yoga mat. If you're using a yoga mat here, lower the right knee and lower your hips. And you might have to adjust this heel depending on what your knee is feeling. This is supposed to be a hip opener. So if you're feeling too much in this ankle and this knee, then adjust the ankle closer to your hip until the knee is okay. And if your hips don't get near or onto the ground, place something underneath the hips, so that they have something to feel stable on. So this is called Swan Pose here. It can do a little bit of a midi back bend here. You can slowly move your torso forward. You can either just stay on lengthened arms. You can come down onto forearms, or you can slowly make your way all the way down onto the ground, depending on where your edge is. So you're moving slowly because you're noticing your internal sensations. You're finding what's called your stopping points. You're trying to find those places of resistance that are telling you that you can no longer go in that direction, at least for now here. And then this is where we'll stay for a few minutes. Now, if this is just too painful and it just doesn't fit, the shape just doesn't fit your body. Remember, your body's always more important than the yoga posture. So if the yoga posture is not working, it's not your body's fault. It's the yoga posture's fault. So you find one that does work for your body. A good one for this one is a posture known as, I call it Eye of the Needle. It's also called Figure 4. It's also called Reclined Pigeon. You make your way onto your back, bend your knees, put your feet on the ground, and then bring your right thigh into your torso, and then right knee is bent. It goes out wide, and put your right ankle on your left thigh here. This might create enough sensation that you stay here. Or you can bring the left leg in, clasp behind the left thigh with your hands, hold that in place. maybe that works for you. Some people like it clasped in front of the shin, and that's okay for that left knee. And you can just stay here. This is the variation of Sleeping Swan here. So, something to try. Otherwise, if you're in Sleeping Swan, notice how this is feeling. Notice if your edge is still okay in this yoga posture. If it's not, if it's pain, then come out, experiment with some modifications, or maybe some props. Maybe you need some soft padding underneath that back leg, or somewhere else underneath you here. So we're about halfway through, about another minute and a half here. And maybe start to contemplate what your definition of average and normal is, and how you use that in your life. There is, the intention of this class is called the Fallacy of Normal. And I thought about this because usually we hold the word normal is just a word. The word average is just a word. And they have technical definitions to them, but we often hold unrealistic idealisms with our personal definitions of average and normal, to the point where we can actually use the word normal against us. Like, we always think, a lot of times our thinking is I'm not normal, and therefore I'm not correct somehow, or I'm just wrong or bad. And the answer is that's not what the meaning of normal actually is. So, a case in point. A couple more breaths here, and I'll get this story started. And this is a story about the United States Air Force in the early 19th century, when aircraft was just starting to be developed. The U.S. military was trying to develop an air force, trying to develop aircraft and pilots to fly those aircraft. But there was a high number of pilot error and accidents in the early days. And the military was trying to understand why the pilots had so much trouble flying the planes. One more breath here, and then we need to come out of this side of Sleeping Swan. So if you're in Sleeping Swan, maybe use your hands and your arms to press you back up into Swan. Maybe a nice gentle back bend. And then slowly bring yourself out of Swan. I'm going to suggest this interesting little move. I'm going to suggest Deer Pose as a counter pose. So maybe lean over to one side if you're in Swan, and swing the left extended leg around and then come up until you're sitting. And then come to seated. Bend the left knee, bring the left heel in towards the left hip. Bend the right knee and bring the right ankle on the outside of the right hip. This is called Deer Pose. It's a yin posture in and of itself, but we're just using it as a counter pose. So we went from external rotation to internal rotation in this right leg, and you might actually feel that after 3 minutes of Sleeping Swan. After another breath of Deer Pose, go ahead and make your way back to hands and knees to get back to do the other side of Sleeping Swan. Now it's the other leg up. So it's the left leg up, right leg back here. And again, feel free to put as much padding underneath that back leg as you want to. Start working that foot over to the right side. And then start lowering the knee, lowering your hips until everything stops. And then if it feels unstable, put props underneath your hips and your front thigh and adjust this front ankle. By the way, if you're looking for a little bit more intensity, you can move the ankle away from your hips until you're feeling enough here. Swan pose for a moment, and then slowly sink yourself down into your version of Sleeping Swan here. And we'll stay here for a few minutes on this side. So the military was looking into why there were so many pilot errors and crashes, and why pilots were having such a tough time operating the aircrafts. And the pilots would complain that it was the cockpits were not built to fit them. They were having trouble maneuvering in the cockpit. And the aircraft manufacturers just said, yeah, no, it's not the cockpit's fault. It's the pilot's fault not being able to maneuver here. So the US Air Force was getting very frustrated with this. So in the 1950s, after decades of this problem, they decided to start trying to figure out what exactly was the problem. And they decided to address pilot size. So they decided to design a cockpit that would fit the perfectly average pilot, with the hopes that it would fit average pilots. So it measured it measured the body dimensions of over 4,000 Air Force pilots. And then it designed a cockpit that met the metrics of those average numbers, the average numbers of all those 4,000 pilots. So they thought the problem was solved. They sent pilots up, and it was the same rate of errors and crashes and malfunctions that they had before. And they didn't understand why. And so they tried another study where they actually studied how they were arriving at the averages. They were trying to study how many pilots actually met the average, and it turns out none of the pilots did. They measured 140 different metrics of the human body. They narrowed it down to what they thought was the 10 most important, and they tried to find pilots that were average in all 10. They found none that were average in all 10. So they narrowed it down to 3 metrics in pilot size. It turns out if you narrow it down to 3 measurements, then 3% of all pilots actually fall within some kind of reasonable range of those metrics. So what they're finding out is there's no such thing as an average pilot. It's a complete fallacy. A couple more breaths here. They were trying to figure out what to do, and then they finally stumbled on something radical. Rather than making one cockpit that fits an average person that does not exist, they made adjustable seats and adjustable controls. We're the direct beneficiary of that, and that all our vehicles have adjustable seats and adjustable steering wheels. You can slowly come out of Sleeping Swan. So bring yourself back up to Swan, and then if you want to, you can do this little trick to get into deer, or you can just move out of this posture however you would like to. Slowly and deliberately is a good idea. So bring that right leg around. Bend the right knee, bring the right heel in front of the right hip. Bend the left leg. Bring the left heel on the outside of the left hip. So we're slowly moving from an externally rotated leg to an internally rotated leg on the left side here for a counter pose. And just staying here for 1 or 2 breaths here. And then from here, you can release. Coming into our next posture, happy baby pose. So make your way onto your back. This is a hip opener. Bend your knees, draw your knees into your chest. Give your knees a nice hug. And then from here, knees move away from each other on the outside of your torso, and then weave your arms in between your legs. Find your shins, your ankles, or your feet, whatever you can reach here. And then try to point your feet up towards the ceiling. Use your hands to gently press the feet, the shins, the knees down towards the ground on either side of your torso. Some of you, maybe your knees touch the ground. My knees probably will never do that here. it's because of this flight problem. It's because of aircraft, of pilot error in aircraft, that we actually technologically benefited with customizable seats, because each single one of us is different. And so since we have different proportions and different ranges of motion, an adjustable seat and an adjustable steering wheel in a car is a very, very handy thing here. Back in the 1940s, a different study was done. So a doctor decided to tabulate the average using 9 different measurable physical metrics of a human body, with a sampling of 15,000 women and a similar number of men. Came up with the average dimensions, the average biometrics or biodimensions of the average, what was sold as the average American female and the average American male. Of course, the data is suspect because it was only white women in the age range of 18 to 20 and white men in the age range of 20 that were measured. So kind of a very limited and not complete sample. And a sculpture was made of the averages of all of those measurements. A sculpture of the female, which was named Norma, and the male, which was named Norman. In 1945, this sculpture was in the Museum of the Cleveland, Ohio Health Department, and the local organizations decided they wanted to do a contest to find out who the closest match was to the average American woman. So they sent out the contest details, and over 3,000 women entered the contest. They thought the expectation was there should be a lot of women out there that are close to average. When they tabulated the results, they found that not a single contestant was average, at least in all nine categories. In fact, even when they eliminated it and just went to 5 measurements, only 40 out of over 3,000 women were even close to it. But when all nine categories were used, then no women were even close. So this was startling. This was startling to the people that were running the contest, because kind of assumed that we're all kind of normal and all kind of average. And what this study was showing is that none of us are normal. None of us are average. When you use more than one metric, maybe you can find some average with just maybe height or something. But as soon as you start using multi-dimensional analysis, it falls all apart, and none of us are average here. So just one more breath here in Happy Baby Pose, and then go ahead and release. The counter pose for this pose I'm going to call Waterfall Pose here. So you can kind of extend your legs up towards the ceiling, point and flex your feet a few times. And then you can go ahead and release, and you can kind of work the kinks out here. Roll over to one side, bring yourself up to seated. We'll get set up for the next yin posture. Yin posture, this next one is called Milky Way Pose. It's a supported bridge pose. You'll need some props for this. So I have a couple of yoga prop blocks that I use, but you can also use books. If you don't have yoga blocks, you can use yoga bolster. You can maybe even use a couch cushion. You might be able to use a pile of blankets for this, but you need to generate some height. So you'll lay back onto your back, bend your knees and put your feet on the ground here. Lift your hips up and then place that prop, whatever you found here, maybe it's some books, underneath your low back, the back of your pelvic bone, so slightly above your glutes here, but below your lumbar spine, the bendy part of your spine here. And then see how this feels. So you're placing your weight on it, you're relaxing here. Knees can stay bent, and if this is generating a lot of sensation, this is your Milky Way pose. Otherwise, next step is to try to extend both legs long. And do this slowly, and maybe start to feel the sensation that's being generated along the psoas, the hip flexor muscles, and the front thighs here. If it's too intense, maybe keep your knees bent, or maybe do one leg at a time for a while here. And then we'll stay here. We'll stay here for a few minutes or so. Legs and feet can do whatever they want to do. So as they relax, they can I'm kind of externally rotated legs, so my feet want to roll out. Maybe yours roll in, or maybe yours stay perfectly pointing straight up. Doesn't matter. You're actually trying to tap into what your body does naturally. So in yin, which is an accepting and allowing practice, we're not worried about an aesthetic shape. We're worried about finding a place where we're just starting to feel some light resistance with the muscles softened. So if you're feeling nothing in this pose, then ratchet up the height of your props. If you're feeling too much, then lower the height of your props. These blocks are on the medium setting, so I could go on the low setting, or I could go on the high setting here. So there's a lot of adjustable things that we can do with the props, just like the adjustable seats and the adjustable steering wheels in cars. We want to have adjustable props and adjustable options and modifications in a yoga practice to fit our very unique body. And it depends on what your definition of normal is. Normal is most of us are actually normal, even when we think we're not here. It's normal to have a unique body. It's normal to have a diverse body with diverse range of motion. It's none of us meet the average. The average is a theoretical concept that just doesn't exist in reality. Doesn't exist in reality. It's a mathematical tool. And one needs to remember that so we don't hold ourselves to idealisms of normalcy and perfection that simply do not exist. A reminder of this is the current moment. So the only thing that really exists is the current moment. What's happening in the current moment? That's reality. That's normal. Not our idealism about what normal is. This makes a great impression on our yoga practice if we can come to realize that we're coming to practice with our own bodies, our unique body in the present moment, our unique mind in the present moment, our unique emotion, our unique being in the present moment. That's maybe one sort of definition of radical acceptance, is accepting the present moment and maybe re-imaging what we think normal is, rather than some kind of theoretical mathematical ideal that everyone should fit. It's obvious from these studies that I cited that they don't. So a couple more breaths here. when you're ready. If you have your legs extended, go ahead and bend both legs. Lift your hips up using your feet and your shoulders pressing into the ground, and then use your hands to remove whatever you were using as a prop, and then gently lower yourself all the way down onto the ground. You can stay here for a moment with a nice neutral spine, or very slowly, maybe bend your knees and draw them into your chest and give your knees a hug. This creates a slight forward fold, a slight extension in your lumbar. And that might feel pretty good after that back bend and that hip flexor stretch in Milky Way pose here. At some point, roll over to one side, come up to a comfortable seated position, and then a little bit of integration before the final resting posture of class. And do some seated twists here. So again, nice comfortable seat, cross-legged if possible. If not possible, then a seat that fits you. Arms come up and overhead. Lengthen out here and then begin to twist and slowly lower your arms as you twist over to the right side here. So maybe hands find the ground or a thigh here. Go up tall through your torso on an inhale. See if you can twist a little bit more deeply on an exhale. So this is a yang twist here. There's some active muscle toning to create the twist here. One more breath here. Head and neck can be neutral if they need to be. And then release, come back forward, arms come up overhead, lengthen out here, and then twist and turn to the other side. So once again, a few breaths here to create the twist here. Notice kind of what's stopping you and maybe where you can keep going in the twist here. Kind of use your breath to coax yourself into kind of your deepest twist today, but it doesn't have to look very deep here. And then bring yourself back to center, maybe a little bit of a counter twist. And then start setting yourself up for this final resting posture of this practice. It can be a traditional Shavasana pose. It can be seated meditation, just sitting in a comfortable seat. But like I said, I'm going to suggest legs up the wall pose. So find some wall space. You can either have as much padding, maybe you want to bolster to place your hips on. I'm going to use this blanket. Sit sideways next to the wall, and then the hardest part of legs up the wall pose is swinging yourself up into legs up the wall. So it might take 1 or 2 or 3 tries to kind of swing up, legs extended, not necessarily perfectly straight. They might have to be bent here. Hips are as close to the wall as you can get them. Don't have to be touching. If you have a lot of tightness in your legs, then probably pretty hard to get the hips right up next to the wall. And then maybe some extra padding, maybe a pillow underneath the head here. Lucky me, I've got the pillow right next to me, so I can place it here. And then other things to make this comfortable. So maybe extra blankets, maybe extra clothing for warmth if it's a little bit too chilly here. Maybe socks. Maybe you have to put on socks on your feet to keep your feet warm here. Wiggle around a little bit until you find a good place where you can soften and relax and feel stable and secure for a few minutes. And then maybe for a few breaths, go back to what we're trying to do at the beginning of practice is instead of changing your breath to some kind of deep, profound, normal, perfect yoga breath, give yourself permission, have the acceptance to just notice whatever your breath is doing right now as you soften here for these final few minutes of class. And then begin to soften other aspects of your being. Maybe soften your face, your eyes, release your jaw, your chin, your cheeks, skin around your ears, the muscles around your eye sockets. Soften your forehead. Soften your shoulders and your rib cage, your arms, your right arm and your left arm, the hands and the fingers. Soften your abdomen and your hips, your thighs, knees. your shins and calves, ankles, heels, feet, bottoms of your feet, your toes, all the toes on your right foot, all the toes on your left foot. Maybe bring your mind back to your breath for a breath or two. Notice if your breath has changed. Maybe you may bring your mind back to your definition of normal. Oftentimes what happens is we in society create an unreal expectation for the idealism of this word called normal. This word called average. And the reality is none of us are average. None of us are average. We are all unique, and this is a good thing. Human beings, every individual is unique. Different times in our history, and in our present, and in our future are unique. There's no such thing as average or normal in the time dimension. There's no average or unique place, or there's no average or normal place. All places are unique. That's a hard idea to let sink in. We so desperately want things to be some kind of idealistic normal. And unfortunately, that simply doesn't exist in reality. So maybe we need to redefine and reframe what we call normal. Maybe normal is actually what's going on in the present moment, what we're feeling, what we are in the present moment. Maybe that is a better definition of normal. some point, bring yourself back. Start moving fingers and moving toes. Move hands and move feet. Maybe make small motions with arms and legs. And start to rock your head slowly from side to side. If you're in legs up the wall pose, maybe gently bend your knees to put your feet against the wall. And maybe push against the wall to slide yourself a little bit away from the wall. And then slowly roll over onto your side and stay there for a moment. If you were in some other Shavasana position, stay there and come out and just kind of reground on your side here. Pause here. Give yourself a big thank you for your efforts and your practice. A big thank you for your uniqueness, your unique embodiment in this universe. The universe is ecstatically joyful that you are here. When you're ready, bring yourself up. Find a comfortable seat, something that's stable. When you get there, bring your hands together at heart center. So I'll end practice with an Om. The inner unique light in me honors the inner unique light in you. Namaste.